The crystalline wineglass shattered against the marble floor of the Terran Embassy's Grand Hall, sending crimson liquid splashing across Ambassador Kellen's pristine white ceremonial robes. The 7-year-old Zephyrian Prince Thyss stood frozen beside the overturned refreshment table, his forearms trembling as 300 dignitaries from 12 different species turned to stare. Queen Elena Martinez rose from her throne with fluid grace, her dark eyes taking in the scene with practiced calm. The child's pale blue skin had flushed to deep violet with terror, his compound eyes wide with the knowledge that he had just ruined the most important diplomatic gathering in a century. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Kellen's voice cracked as he dabbed at his stained robes, "I assure you, this was merely an accident," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent hall. She stepped down from the dais, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from her security detail. Protocol demanded she remain seated during formal ceremonies, but protocol had never accounted for a terrified child who looked ready to collapse. Prince Thyss's translator chip rendered his whispered words in perfect Terran standard. I'm sorry. Mama said never touch the human things. I'm sorry." Elena knelt beside him, bringing herself to his eye level. The hall remained deathly quiet. "What's your name, little one?" "Thy, Your Majesty. I am Prince Thyss of the Third Moon Colony." His voice grew smaller with each word. "Father will send me to the discipline chambers. I have disgraced our house before the human queen." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Behind her, she sensed Captain Rodriguez of the Royal Guard shift his weight, a subtle warning. The Zephyrian delegation's reaction to their prince's transgression was being carefully monitored. "Tell me, Prince Thyss," Elena said, her tone gentle but clear enough for every translator in the room to catch. "Were you trying to reach the honeycakes?" The child's forearms wrapped around his small torso. "Yes, Your Majesty, but the table was too tall, and when I climbed up, everything fell. I broke the beautiful glass. I made a mess of the human noble's clothes." Elena glanced at the refreshment table. It had been designed for human height, placed at adult eye level. No consideration had been given to smaller species or children. She filed this observation away as her fingers found the child's shoulder. "In my home," she said, loud enough for the assembly to hear, "we have a rule. If you're hungry, you ask for help. If you make a mistake, you learn from it. If you break something by accident, we clean it up together." Ambassador Kellen cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, while your graciousness is appreciated, perhaps we should—" "Captain Rodriguez." Elena's voice cut through his words like a blade. "Yes, Your Majesty. Please escort Prince Thyss to the kitchen. Chef Morrison has fresh honeycakes cooling on racks that are exactly the right height for curious young princes." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Zephyrian ambassador, a stern female named Vexa, stepped forward. "Queen Elena, we cannot impose upon your hospitality. The child must face consequences for his actions. It is our way." Elena stood slowly, her full height commanding attention. "And what consequences would those be, Ambassador?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Vex's mandibles clicked nervously. "Discipline chambers, 3 days without food, time to reflect on proper behavior." The hall went dead silent. Elena felt the shift in the room's energy as her own delegation realized what they were witnessing. 3 days without food. For a 7-year-old, for reaching toward honeycakes at a diplomatic reception. "I see." Elena's voice remained perfectly level, but those who knew her recognized the ice beneath. "And this discipline would occur immediately?" "Upon our return to the ship, yes. It is tradition. It is necessary." Elena looked down at Prince Thyss, who had begun to shake more violently. Bruise. She made her decision. "Captain Rodriguez, please inform Chef Morrison that Prince Thyss will be staying for dinner, as my personal guest." "Your Majesty," Vex's voice sharpened, "the child belongs to our delegation. You cannot simply Ambassador Vexa." Elena's words stopped her mid-sentence. "Are you familiar with Terran diplomatic law regarding the protection of minors?" Vex's compound eyes narrowed. "I am not certain I understand. Any child, regardless of species, who enters Terran space under diplomatic protection has the right to sanctuary if faced with what we classify as cruel treatment. Elena's smile was razor thin. 3 days without food for reaching toward refreshments would certainly qualify. The implications crashed through the hall like a tidal wave. Elena had just publicly declared the Zephyrian punishment system cruel. She had offered sanctuary to a foreign prince. She had challenged the authority of an allied delegation in front of representatives from 12 different worlds. And she had done it all to protect one frightened child who had simply been too short to reach the honeycakes. Prince Thyss looked up at her with something approaching awe, his 4 small hands reaching toward her extended palm. The political firestorm that followed would reshape interstellar relations for decades to come. But none of that mattered as Elena felt the child's trembling fingers curl trustingly around hers. Elena guided Prince Thyss toward the kitchen, aware that every step was being recorded by a dozen different media drones. Behind them, heated whispers erupted from the Zephyrian delegation, while Ambassador Kellen still dabbed futilely at his wine-stained robes. The child's small hand remained firmly clasped in hers, his trembling gradually subsiding. "Your Majesty," Captain Rodriguez fell into step beside them, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. "Ambassador Vexa is requesting immediate private audience." "She seems quite agitated." "I imagine she is." Elena didn't slow her pace. "Schedule it for after Prince Thyss has had his dinner." "Ma'am, the Zephyrian ship is powering weapons systems." Elena stopped walking. The corridor suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Prince Thyss looked up at her with growing alarm as he sensed the adult tension crackling around them. "Defensive measures only, Captain. Shields up, but no aggressive positioning. I won't have them think we're escalating." Elena knelt again beside the prince. "Thyss, I need you to listen carefully. Do you trust me?" The child's forearms wrapped more tightly around himself. "Yes, Your Majesty. But if Father is angry with your planet, your father isn't aboard that ship, is he?" Thyss shook his head. "Father stayed home. Ambassador Vexa speaks for our family when we travel to human space." "She is," he struggled with the words. "She is very strict about honor." Elena exchanged a meaningful look with Captain Rodriguez, a diplomatic representative with full authority. A child prince far from home, and weapons systems coming online. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Chef Morrison!" Elena called as they entered the kitchen. The broad-shouldered man turned from his prep station, his weathered face creasing into a smile at the sight of the young prince. "Your Majesty? And who's this young visitor?" "Prince Thyss would like some honeycakes, Morrison." At a table he can actually reach, Morrison's trained eye immediately assessed the child's height and the situation's gravity. Within moments, he had arranged a selection of pastries on a low side table, complete with a child-sized chair and a glass of milk. "There we go, Your Highness. Fresh from the oven, just like my grandmother used to make." Prince Thyss approached the table cautiously, as if expecting it to disappear. When he finally bit into a honey cake, his expression transformed from fear to wonder. "It tastes like sunshine," he whispered. Elena smiled, but her attention was divided. Through the kitchen service window, she could see the main hall where clusters of diplomats were engaged in intense conversations. The universal translator system was working overtime, rendering urgent discussions in more than 20 languages. "Your Majesty," Captain Rodriguez touched his earpiece. "Admiral Chen reports 3 more ships have entered our territorial space. Zephyrian design, but flying unmarked transponders." Elena's blood chilled. This wasn't about diplomatic protocol anymore. This was about something much larger, something that turned a child's accident into a potential interstellar incident. "Prince Thyss," she said carefully, sitting across from him at the small table. "Can you tell me more about these discipline chambers? What do they look like?" The child's enthusiasm for the honey cakes dimmed slightly. "They are small rooms. Very cold. You sit in darkness and think about what you did wrong. Sometimes there are tools." "Tools?" "To help you remember better. Sharp things. Hot things." Thyss said this matter-of-factly, as if describing the weather. "All children of noble families must learn discipline. It makes us strong." Elena's hands clenched beneath the table. "Torture." They were describing systematic child torture as character building. "How often do children visit these chambers, Prince Thyss?" "Whenever we make mistakes." My sister Yala went there for 7 days when she spoke out of turn to an adult. My brother Kess went for 10 days when he cried during weapons training. This took another bite of honey cake. I have only been twice. Once for 3 days when I was 4, once for 5 days when I was 6. Elena felt Morrison's sharp intake of breath behind her. Captain Rodriguez's hand had moved unconsciously toward his sidearm. "What did you do when you were 4, Thyss?" I asked. "Why we couldn't play with the servant children?" Ambassador Vexa said curiosity about lower beings showed weakness in my character. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The Zephyrian noble class wasn't just practicing child abuse. They were systematically breaking their young to create compliant adults, and Queen Elena had just publicly challenged that system in front of representatives from 12 different worlds. "Your Majesty," Rodriguez's voice was urgent. "Long-range sensors show a Zephyrian battle fleet jumping into the outer system. 17 ships. They're not running diplomatic flags." Elena stood slowly. Through the service window, she could see Ambassador Vexa pushing through the crowd toward the kitchen, her mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. Behind her, 2 large Zephyrian guards were clearing a path with barely concealed aggression. Prince Thyss looked up from his honeycakes, suddenly aware that the adults around him were afraid. "Queen Elena," he said in his small voice. "Am I in trouble again?" Elena placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of 2 civilizations balanced on her next words. "No, little prince, you're not in trouble. But I think some other people might be." The kitchen doors burst open as Ambassador Vexa strode in, her compound eyes fixed on Prince Thyss with unmistakable fury. Ambassador Vexa's presence filled the kitchen like a storm front, her chitinous frame towering over the child-sized table. Prince Thyss immediately shrank back, the half-eaten honey cake forgotten as primal fear replaced wonder in his eyes. "Prince Thyss," Vexa's translated voice carried the cold authority of absolute power. "You will come with me immediately. Your behavior has brought shame upon the Third Moon Colony, and disgrace upon your bloodline." Elena stepped between them, her movement fluid but unmistakably protective. "Ambassador, Prince Thyss is under Terran diplomatic sanctuary. Any attempt to remove him without proper legal proceedings would constitute an act of aggression." Vexa's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Your human laws mean nothing beyond your own borders, Queen Elena. The child belongs to us. His discipline is not your concern." "Actually," Elena's voice carried the precision of carefully studied law, "the Interstellar Convention on Diplomatic Protection extends sanctuary rights to all sentient minors within signatory space. The Zephyrian government signed those accords 14 years ago." The silence stretched taut. Behind Vexa, her 2 guards shifted position, hands moving toward concealed weapons. Captain Rodriguez mirrored their movement, his own hand finding his sidearm's grip. "You cannot hide behind technicalities forever," Vexa said. "The child must return for proper correction. 3 days in the discipline chamber is lenient for such a public disgrace." 3 days without food," Elena corrected, her tone conversational but her eyes hard as steel. 3 days in darkness, with tools designed to inflict pain on a 7-year-old child. "Ambassador, what age did discipline chamber training begin for you?" Vexa's compound eyes narrowed. "That is not your concern." 4 years old, Prince Thyss whispered from behind Elena. "All noble children begin at 4. Ambassador Vexa was from the First Moon Colony. They begin at 3. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Chef Morrison's knife clattered against his cutting board. Captain Rodriguez's jaw tightened visibly, but Elena's expression remained carefully neutral, even as her strategic mind cataloged the implications. Systematic child abuse, beginning at 3 years old. An entire civilization's ruling class conditioned through torture to accept absolute authority. And now that same system was threatening to go to war rather than allow their methods to be questioned publicly. "Ambassador Vexa," Elena said quietly, "I'm going to ask you to leave my kitchen. I will not leave without the prince. Then you'll be staying for a very long time." She spoke rapidly in her native language to her guards, who immediately flanked Elena's position. Captain Rodriguez drew his weapon in a smooth motion, the energy charge humming to life. "Stand down!" Elena said sharply, though whether she was addressing Rodriguez or Vexa's guards remained unclear. Nobody draws blood in my kitchen. Your Majesty, Prince Thyss tugged at her sleeve with one small hand. May I say something? Elena looked down at him, surprised. Throughout the confrontation, the child had remained silent, watching the adults with the hyper-vigilant awareness of someone long accustomed to violence. Now his violet eyes held something she hadn't expected, determination. Ambassador Vexa, Thyss said, his child's voice carrying clearly through the translator system. I formally request sanctuary under Terran diplomatic law. The words hit like a thunderclap. Vexa recoiled as if struck, her mandibles spreading wide in shock. Even the guards hesitated, clearly uncertain how to respond to a child invoking legal protection. You cannot, Vexa struggled with the concept. Children do not make such requests. Children obey. Children submit to correction when they transgress. This child just did, Elena said softly. And under interstellar law, any sentient being capable of understanding the consequences of their actions has the right to request sanctuary from cruel treatment. Age is not a disqualifying factor. Thyss stepped forward, his 4 small hands clasped together in what Elena recognized as a formal petition stance. I understand what this means, Ambassador. I understand Father will disown me. I understand I can never return to the Third Moon Colony. But I also understand that the discipline chambers are wrong. The tools are wrong. Making children hurt is wrong. Impossible, Vexa breathed. No child of noble birth would choose exile over honor. Your conditioning was incomplete. You have been corrupted by human softness. No, Thyss said simply. I have been treated with kindness, and now I know the difference. Elena felt her heart break and soar simultaneously. This 7-year-old child had just chosen permanent exile from his family and culture, rather than return to systematic abuse. He had made that choice after eating honeycakes and experiencing what it felt like to be treated gently. The implications echoed far beyond this kitchen. If one Zephyrian prince could recognize their system as wrong, how many others might make the same choice given the opportunity? How many children across their worlds were suffering in silence, believing torture was normal because they had never known compassion? Captain Rodriguez, Elena said, never taking her eyes off Vexa. Please contact Admiral Chen. Inform him that Prince Thyss has formally requested political asylum under Section 12 of the Interstellar Convention. He is now under the official protection of the Terran Crown. Vexa's translator couldn't quite capture the sound that emerged from her throat, but Elena recognized it as pure rage. You think you have won something here, human queen. You have no idea what forces you have set in motion. Enlighten me. The Zephyrian High Council will never accept this precedent. If one child can claim your protection, others will follow. Our entire social system will collapse. War is preferable to cultural extinction. Elena smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Ambassador, you've just admitted that your entire civilization depends on torturing children. I think you've made my case for me. Behind Vexa, alarms began sounding throughout the embassy complex. Through the service window, Elena could see diplomats from other species watching the confrontation with growing alarm as the situation's scope became clear. This wasn't just about one child anymore. It was about whether the galaxy would continue to tolerate institutionalized child abuse hidden behind cultural sovereignty, or whether basic principles of sentient rights would finally be enforced across species lines. Elena knew that within hours, every major government in known space would be forced to choose sides. The decision of one small prince to ask for honeycakes had just started the most significant interstellar crisis in centuries. But as she looked down at Prince Thyss, still standing brave and small beside his mostly eaten pastry, Elena knew she would make the same choice again. Some things were worth fighting for. The embassy's emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the kitchen as diplomatic protocols collapsed around them. Elena's communication implant chimed with urgent messages from the Terran Defense Ministry, but she ignored them, focusing instead on Prince Thyss, who stood with surprising dignity despite being at the center of an interstellar storm. Your Majesty, Captain Rodriguez spoke quietly into his comm unit before addressing her. Admiral Chen reports 47 Zephyrian vessels now in system. They're demanding Prince Thyss's immediate return and threatening military action if we refuse. Ambassador Vex's mandibles spread in what might have been satisfaction. You see, Queen Elena? This child is not worth starting a war. Return him now, and we can negotiate reasonable terms for ending this misunderstanding. I don't negotiate with people who torture children, Elena replied flatly. Torture? Vex's translator struggled with the concept. Discipline chambers provide necessary character formation. Without proper correction, children grow weak, undisciplined, unfit to lead. You humans coddle your young and produce adults who lack strength. Elena felt Chef Morrison shift behind her, his weathered hands gripping his prep knife with visible restraint. The man had raised 4 children of his own, and his expression suggested he was reconsidering his stance on nonviolence. Prince Thyss, Elena said, kneeling beside the child again, I need you to understand something very important. If you stay under our protection, there will be fighting. People might get hurt. Some might die. Are you certain this is what you want? The 7-year-old's forearms trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. Queen Elena, how many other children are in discipline chambers right now? The question caught Elena off guard. She looked to Vexa, who had gone very still. Answer him, Ambassador. Vexa's compound eyes fixed on something beyond Elena's shoulder. Discipline is ongoing. Children must learn. How many? Thyss pressed, his childish voice carrying unexpected steel. The Third Moon Colony alone houses approximately 3,000 noble children at any given time, Vexa said finally. Each learns according to their needs. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. 3,000 children. In systematic torture chambers. On one colony among dozens. Across all Zephyrian space, Elena said carefully. How many children are currently undergoing discipline? Vex's translator fell silent for long moments before answering. Numbers are difficult to calculate. Each family manages correction according to tradition. Tens of thousands, Thyss whispered. Maybe hundreds of thousands. And that's just the noble families. Servant children face worse. Elena stood slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. Through the service window she could see that every diplomat in the main hall was now staring at the kitchen, their conversations suspended as translator networks carried Thyss's revelations across the embassy. Captain Rodriguez, patch me through to Admiral Chen. Priority Alpha. Ma'am, they're demanding. Now, Captain. Rodriguez activated his collar comm. Admiral? Queen Elena for you, sir? Elena spoke clearly, knowing her words were being recorded and would soon reach every major government in known space. Admiral Chen, this is a direct order from the Crown. Any Zephyrian vessel that attempts to breach our territorial sovereignty will be treated as an act of war. Any attempt to forcibly remove Prince Thyss from Terran protection will be met with the full might of the Terran Defense Forces. Static crackled before Chen's voice came through. Your Majesty, with respect, we're outnumbered nearly 3-1. If this escalates to shooting, then we shoot, Admiral. Some lines cannot be crossed. Elena ended the connection and turned back to Vexa, who was watching the conversation with growing alarm. You cannot be serious, the ambassador said. One alien child is not worth risking your entire fleet. You're right, Elena replied. One child isn't worth my entire fleet, but hundreds of thousands of children being systematically tortured, that's worth everything I have to give. The kitchen doors burst open again as Ambassador Kellen rushed in, his wine-stained robes flapping behind him. Your Majesty, please. We're receiving urgent communications from 17 different governments demanding explanations. The Andromedan Consortium is calling for an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The situation is completely out of control. Elena noticed that several other species representatives had followed Kellen into the kitchen, their expressions ranging from concern to outright fear. Among them she recognized Ambassador Scythia from the Crystalline Collective and Representative Thorn from the Binary System Alliance. Your Majesty, Scythia's crystalline voice chimed like struck bells. Perhaps there is a compromise position that could... No. Elena's voice cut through the diplomatic chatter like a blade. There is no compromise position on child torture. Either it stops, or we stop it. Representative Thorne stepped forward, his mechanical augmentations whirring softly. Queen Elena, while your moral position is admirable, the practical implications of this confrontation could destabilize the entire sector. Perhaps if Prince Thyss could be relocated to neutral space. I'm not going anywhere, Thyss said suddenly, his small voice carrying surprising authority. Queen Elena asked if I trusted her. I do, and I trust that someone needs to speak for all the children who can't speak for themselves. The room fell silent. Elena looked down at this remarkable child who had somehow found the courage to stand against an entire civilization's worth of conditioning and abuse. In his violet eyes she saw not just determination but hope. Hope that adults might finally choose to protect children instead of hurting them. Ambassador Vexa, Elena said, turning back to the Zephyrian representative. I'm going to make you an offer. One chance to resolve this without bloodshed? Vex's mandibles clicked nervously. I am listening. Open your discipline chambers to independent inspection by the Galactic Council. Submit to immediate review of your child-rearing practices by an interspecies committee. Agree to binding reforms based on established sentient rights protocols. Impossible. Our internal affairs are not subject to alien oversight. Then you've chosen war over accountability. Elena's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. And I can live with that choice. Can you? Through the embassy's walls, the sound of Terran fighters launching filled the air with distant thunder. Elena placed her hand on Prince Thyss's shoulder, feeling the small body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Whatever came next, this child would never again face torture disguised as discipline. The first explosions lit the sky beyond the embassy's reinforced windows, turning the artificial twilight into strobing daylight. Prince Thyss pressed against Elena's side as the building shuddered from nearby weapons fire, but he didn't cry out or try to hide. Instead, his 4 small hands clutched at her formal gown with desperate trust. Your Majesty. Captain Rodriguez's voice carried barely controlled urgency. Admiral Chen reports Zephyrian forces are attempting to force a landing at the embassy complex. They're demanding immediate access to retrieve Prince Thyss. Elena's mind raced through tactical options while her arms tightened protectively around the child. Through the service window, she could see other species diplomats evacuating toward the emergency shelters, their elegant robes and formal wear incongruous against the chaos of active combat. Captain, lock down all embassy sectors. Nobody gets through to this kitchen without proper authorization codes. Ma'am, they're burning through our outer defenses. We have maybe 10 minutes before. The building shook again, harder this time. Dust rained from the ceiling as structural supports groaned under weapons fire. Ambassador Vexa stood frozen near the entrance, her compound eyes fixed on the violence her people had chosen over accountability. This madness must stop, she said, her translator rendering what might have been panic. Return the child and we can end this before more blood is spilled. The madness started long before today, Elena replied, never loosening her grip on Prince Thyss. It started the first time someone decided that hurting children was acceptable behavior. Your Majesty, Chef Morrison approached slowly, his weathered hands steady despite the chaos around them. There's a service tunnel that connects to the underground transit system, built during the embassy's construction for emergency evacuations. If we need to move the boy, Elena nodded gratefully. Morrison's practicality was exactly what they needed right now. Prince Thyss, can you run if we need to? The child looked up at her with those remarkable violet eyes. I can do whatever you need me to do, Queen Elena, but I won't hide from Ambassador Vexa anymore. The simple courage in his voice stilled Elena's heart. This 7-year-old had found strength she'd seen in seasoned military officers, drawing it from the simple knowledge that someone was willing to fight for him. Ambassador Kellen, Elena called to the wine-stained diplomat who was huddled near the prep stations. Contact the Galactic Council immediately. Inform them that the Terran Crown is invoking Article 7 of the Interstellar Convention, protection of sentient minors from cruel treatment. We're requesting emergency mediation and immediate investigation into Zephyrian child-rearing practices. Kellen's face went pale. Article 7 hadn't been invoked in over 60 years, and never by a major power against an allied government. Your Majesty, that's essentially a formal accusation of crimes against sentience. The political ramifications, The political ramifications of systematic child torture are worse, Elena cut him off. Another explosion shook the building. Closer this time. Send the transmission now. Prince Thyss tugged at Elena's sleeve with one small hand. Queen Elena, may I ask you something? Of course, little prince. When this is over, when I can never go home again, what happens to children like me? Who takes care of us? Elena felt her throat tighten. In all the strategic calculations and diplomatic maneuvering, she hadn't fully considered the human cost of what she was setting in motion. This child would be the first of potentially thousands of Zephyrian refugees, all of them traumatized, all of them needing homes and healing. We take care of you, she said simply. All of us. However many there are for as long as it takes, even if there are thousands, especially if there are thousands. Captain Rodriguez suddenly stood straighter, his hand moving to his earpiece. Your Majesty, Admiral Chen reports massive hyperspace signatures incoming. Unknown configurations, multiple species. Elena's pulse quickened. Either the Zephyrians had called in allies, making their situation hopeless, or, ma'am, it's the Galactic Council Emergency Response Fleet. 17-member species, including the Andromedan Consortium and the Crystalline Collective. They're broadcasting demands for immediate ceasefire and neutral zone establishment. The kitchen fell silent, except for the distant sound of weapons fire gradually tapering off. Elena felt a surge of something between relief and vindication. The galaxy's major powers had arrived not to support either side, but to enforce the very laws she had invoked. Ambassador Vex's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed this development. The Council cannot interfere in internal Zephyrian affairs. We are a sovereign system with rights to govern our own populations. Sovereignty doesn't extend to crimes against sentience, Elena replied. As of 10 minutes ago, Prince Thyss became a formal witness under Council protection. His testimony about the discipline chambers will be heard by representatives from every major government in known space. For the first time since entering the kitchen, Vexa looked genuinely frightened. You don't understand what you've done. That child's testimony could trigger investigation of dozens of worlds, hundreds of colonies. The entire balance of power will shift toward protecting children instead of exploiting them, Elena finished. Yes, that was rather the point. Through the service window, Elena could see new figures entering the main hall. Council peacekeepers in their distinctive blue armor, along with representatives she recognized from previous diplomatic meetings. The immediate military crisis was ending, but the larger battle was just beginning. Prince Thyss looked up at her with something approaching wonder. Queen Elena, does this mean other children won't have to go to discipline chambers anymore? Elena knelt beside him one final time, meeting his eyes with complete honesty. It means we're going to try very hard to make sure they don't. And it means children like you will never have to face that fear alone again. The child's forearms wrapped around her neck in a fierce hug that spoke of gratitude too large for words. Over his small shoulder, Elena watched as Council investigators began setting up equipment in the main hall, preparing to document testimony that would reshape interstellar law. It had started with honey cakes and a shattered wine glass. It would end with justice for every child who had suffered in silence, believing their pain was normal because no adult had ever shown them kindness. Some revolutions, Elena mused as she held the trembling prince, began in the most unlikely places. The council chambers aboard the massive peacekeeping vessel echoed with translated voices as 17 species debated the evidence spread across holographic displays above the central forum. Prince Thyss sat in a specially designed child's chair beside Elena, his 4 small hands folded in his lap as he watched adults argue about his fate and the fate of thousands like him. It had been 3 days since the standoff at the embassy. 3 days of testimony, evidence gathering, and increasingly heated diplomatic exchanges as the full scope of Zephyrian child-rearing practices became clear to the galactic community. The evidence is overwhelming, announced Councillor Vexon of the Andromedan Consortium, her ethereal form shimmering as she gestured toward the displays. Systematic confinement, deliberate starvation, and application of pain-inducing devices to children as young as 3 years old. By any reasonable definition, these constitute crimes against sentience. Ambassador Vexa stood at the Zephyrian delegation's podium, her mandibles spread in defiant posture. The consortium speaks from ignorance of our ways. What you call cruelty, we call necessary strength building. Our methods have produced disciplined leaders for millennia. Leaders who require torture to maintain compliance, Elena interjected from the Terran section. Ambassador, your own testimony revealed that adult Zephyrian nobles are conditioned through childhood trauma to never question authority. That's not strength, that's systematic psychological damage. Prince Thyss stirred beside her, his small voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation network. May I speak, please? The vast chamber fell silent. 17 species representatives turned their attention to the 7-year-old who had triggered this crisis by reaching for honeycakes. Councillor Vexon's voice was gentle, despite its alien harmonics. Prince Thyss, you have already provided extensive testimony. Are you certain you wish to address the full council? Yes, please. Thyss stood carefully, his purple skin pale but his posture straight. I want to tell everyone what discipline chambers really do to children. Elena felt her chest tighten as the small prince walked to the central testimony platform. She had spent hours with him over the past 3 days, listening to details that would haunt her dreams for years to come. But Thyss had insisted on speaking publicly, determined that other children should benefit from his courage. My name is Prince Thyss of the Third Moon Colony, he began, his child's voice amplified throughout the chamber. I have been in discipline chambers twice. The first time I was 4 years old. Murmurs rippled through the various species sections as translators rendered his words into dozens of languages. I was put in the chamber because I asked why servant children couldn't play with us. The room was completely dark and very cold. I could not sit or lie down because there were sharp things on the floor that would cut me if I tried to rest. I had to stand for 3 days without food or water. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably. Elena noticed that even some of the Zephyrian delegation appeared disturbed by Thyss's calm recitation of facts. On the second day, they brought tools. Hot metal pieces that they pressed against my arms to help me remember that questions show weakness. Burns healed, but I stopped asking questions. The chamber was dead silent now. Councillor Zephyr of the Silicon Collective, whose crystalline structure normally rang with constant harmonics, had gone completely quiet. When I was 6, Thyss continued, I cried during weapons training because the target dummies looked like the servant children I'd wanted to play with. 5 days that time, they used electrical devices to teach me that empathy was a flaw to be corrected. Elena watched Ambassador Vex's compound eyes as her people's methods were laid bare before the galaxy's most powerful governments. For the first time, the Zephyrian diplomats seemed to grasp how their traditions appeared to outside observers. But the worst part, Thyss said, his voice growing stronger, wasn't the pain. It was believing that I deserved it. That something was wrong with me for wanting to be kind to others. That my thoughts and feelings were bad and needed to be fixed. He paused, looking directly at the Zephyrian section. When Queen Elena gave me honeycakes and treated me gently, I realized that the discipline chambers weren't making me stronger. They were teaching me to accept cruelty as normal. They were breaking something inside me that was supposed to stay whole. The silence stretched for long moments before Councillor Vexan spoke. Prince Thyss, you have shown remarkable courage in sharing your experiences. Do you have anything else you wish to tell the council? Yes. Thyss turned to face the assembled representatives. There are thousands of children in discipline chambers right now, on dozens of worlds. They think they deserve to suffer because no adult has ever shown them that suffering isn't necessary for strength. He looked back at Elena, his violet eyes bright with determination. Queen Elena showed me that real strength comes from protecting others, not from learning to endure pain without crying. She started a war to keep one child safe. That's what strength actually looks like. Elena felt tears threatening as this extraordinary child turned back to address beings from across the galaxy. Please don't let other children think that cruelty is love. Please don't let them grow up believing that kindness is weakness. Please help them before they forget that they deserve to be treated gently. Thyss walked back to his chair beside Elena, his small mission complete. Around the chamber, Elena could see representatives from multiple species engaging in heated discussions as the implications of his testimony sank in. Ambassador Vexa stood slowly at her podium. The child speaks, eloquently. But individual cases cannot be used to condemn an entire civilization's approach to child-rearing. Our methods produce results. What results? The question came from an unexpected source. Representative Korn of the Zephyrian trade colonies, his own mandibles clicking with agitation. Children who grow into adults incapable of independent thought. Leaders who maintain power through fear because they never learned to inspire loyalty through trust. Vexa turned toward her own delegation in shock. Representative Korn, surely you do not suggest... I suggest that this child has shown more courage in 3 days than our entire High Council has demonstrated in decades, Korn replied. And I suggest that any system requiring the torture of 7-year-olds to maintain order is a system that deserves to fall. Elena watched as fractures appeared within the Zephyrian delegation itself, representatives who had clearly been questioning their people's methods finding their voices in the wake of Thyss's testimony. Councillor Vexen called for order as the chamber erupted in discussion. The council will recess for deliberation. All parties will have final statements tomorrow morning, after which we will issue our ruling on the charges of systematic crimes against sentience. As the session ended and representatives began filing out, Elena felt a small hand slip into hers. Prince Thyss looked up at her with exhausted but hopeful eyes. Do you think it worked, Queen Elena? Do you think they'll help the other children? Elena squeezed his hand gently. I think, little prince, that you just changed the galaxy. And yes, I believe they'll help. For the first time in 3 days, Prince Thyss smiled. The final session convened under the weight of decisions that would reshape interstellar law. Elena took her place in the Terran section, while Prince Thyss sat beside her, no longer trembling but watching the proceedings with the grave attention of someone far older than his 7 years. Councillor Vexan's ethereal form brightened as she called the assembly to order. Representatives from 17 species filled the chamber, but Elena noticed several empty seats in the Zephyrian section. During the night, 4 more colonial representatives had broken with the High Council's position, demanding immediate reforms to child-rearing practices. The Council has reached unanimous consensus, Vexan announced, her words carrying across the chamber in perfect translation. The evidence of systematic cruel treatment of Zephyrian children constitutes crimes against sentience under Articles 7 through 12 of the Interstellar Convention. Ambassador Vexa remained standing at her podium, but Elena could see the defeat in her posture. Around the chamber, other species representatives watched with the gravity of beings who understood they were witnessing a historical moment. However, Vexhan continued, the Council recognizes that cultural change cannot be imposed through force alone. Therefore, we offer the Zephyrian High Council a choice. Helena leaned forward, sensing the carefully crafted compromise that would either resolve this crisis or escalate it beyond containment. Option 1. Submit to immediate Council oversight of all child welfare facilities. Accept binding reforms based on established sentient rights protocols. Allow unrestricted access to any child requesting sanctuary under Article 7 protections. Vex's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed the implications. Complete surrender of sovereignty over internal affairs, transformation of their entire social structure, potential exodus of noble children to other worlds. Option 2. Vexhan's tone grew harder. Face immediate economic sanctions, territorial quarantine, and military intervention to enforce child protection protocols. The choice must be made within 72 standard hours. The chamber erupted in urgent discussions as species delegates calculated the precedent being set. Elena felt a mix of vindication and concern. They had won protection for Zephyrian children, but at the cost of potentially destabilizing an entire civilization. Prince Thyss tugged at her sleeve. Queen Elena, what happens to Ambassador Vexa if her people choose the reforms? Elena looked down at him, struck again by his capacity for empathy even toward those who had hurt him. I imagine she'll have to find new ways to serve her people, little prince. Ways that don't involve hurting children. Representative Korn of the Zephyrian trade colonies requests permission to address the council, Vexen announced. Elena watched as the representative who had broken ranks the day before approached the central podium. His presence there represented something unprecedented, a Zephyrian official publicly contradicting the High Council on matters of internal policy. Councilors, fellow representatives, Korn began, his translated voice carrying newfound confidence. "I speak not just for the trade colonies, but for 7 colonial systems that have voted to accept immediate council oversight and binding reforms." Shocked murmurs rippled through the chamber. Elena realized she was witnessing the fracturing of the Zephyrian government in real time, as colonial representatives chose child protection over cultural tradition. "We have seen the courage of one small prince who chose sanctuary over submission," Korn continued. "We have heard testimony that shames any thinking being. We choose to end practices that have damaged our children and stunted our civilization for centuries." Ambassador Vexa spoke for the first time that day, her voice carrying desperate authority. "Representative Korn, you exceed your mandate. Colonial governments cannot unilaterally accept council oversight without High Council approval." "Actually, they can," Elena interjected, rising from her seat. "Under Article 15 of the Colonial Autonomy Accords, any colonial system may request independent council mediation for matters involving sentient rights violations. The High Council's authority doesn't extend to crimes against sentience." Elena's legal preparation over the past 3 days paid off as she watched Vexa realize that her own government's colonial structure had provided the mechanism for its dissolution. The very autonomy granted to manage distant worlds efficiently now allowed those worlds to escape centralized control. "Counselor Vexen," Elena continued, "the Terran Crown formally requests that any Zephyrian colonies choosing council oversight be granted immediate protection status. We volunteer to provide temporary sanctuary for any children needing medical care or psychological support during the transition." Prince Thyss stood beside her, his small voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I want to help too. I want to tell other children that they don't have to be afraid anymore. That there are adults who will protect them instead of hurting them." Elena placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of leadership that this child was already carrying. At 7 years old, Prince Thyss had become the face of interstellar child protection, and he was embracing that responsibility with courage that humbled her. "The Council recognizes the Terran offer of sanctuary," Vexhan announced. "Additionally, the Andromedan Consortium, the Crystalline Collective, and the Binary System Alliance have volunteered resources for rehabilitation programs." Elena looked around the chamber as species after species volunteered support for Zephyrian children. What had begun as one child's request for asylum had become a galactic commitment to ending institutionalized child abuse wherever it existed. Representative Korn stepped forward again. "Counselors, I have urgent communication from the Third Moon Colony. They formally request council intervention and immediate inspection of all discipline chambers. They are asking for help dismantling the facilities." Elena felt Prince Thyss grip her hand tightly. His home colony, the place that had conditioned him to accept cruelty, was choosing to protect its children instead. "Ambassador Vexa," Vexhan addressed the increasingly isolated High Council representative, "do you wish to make a final statement before the Council proceeds with intervention protocols?" Vexa stood silent for long moments, her compound eyes fixed on Prince Thyss. Finally she spoke. "That child asked questions that I was conditioned never to ask. He showed empathy that I was taught to suppress. He chose courage over compliance." She paused, her mandibles trembling slightly. Perhaps it is time for adult Zephyrians to learn from the wisdom of our young, instead of breaking their spirits to match our damaged hearts." The chamber fell completely silent as Ambassador Vexa, representative of a government built on absolute authority, publicly acknowledged the fundamental failure of her people's system. "The Zephyrian High Council accepts council oversight," she said formally. We request assistance in learning how to raise our children with strength that does not require cruelty." Elena felt tears on her cheeks as the chamber erupted in relieved applause. Prince Thyss looked up at her with wonder in his violet eyes. "We did it, Queen Elena. We actually saved them." "No, little prince," Elena replied, pulling him into a fierce hug. "You saved them. You saved them all." As species representatives began coordinating massive humanitarian efforts and colonial governments pledged resources for rehabilitation programs, Elena held the small prince who had changed the galaxy by wanting nothing more than honeycakes he could reach. Sometimes the most important revolutions began with the smallest acts of kindness.